Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a truly radical premise from a fascinating set of source texts, primarily the Law of God and the Judgment Papers. These texts suggest that absolutely everything we think we know about the word law, from courtrooms down to your everyday traffic ticket, might just be a complete illusion. We're going to examine the very word law, look at its etymological history, and see how the source argues it's been completely misinterpreted once mankind decided we could just scribble some text onto parchment, paper, or even in digital formats and subjectively call it law.
Just take a listen to this quote right off the bat. "There is no such thing as an illegal act in God's eyes, for God permits the freedom of choice to choose." Now, that is a massive paradigm shift, isn't it? The author is completely tossing out our traditional legal vocabulary, arguing that true universal authority doesn't deal in man-made illegalities written in statute books, but rather in absolute freedom of choice, which is then followed by absolute spiritual consequences.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap for making sense of it all. We'll start with the definition of law, look at the illusion of rules, examine the state and force, explore light versus dark power, and finally wrap up with the ultimate code of conduct.
Section 1. The definition of law. According to the source, true law is simply an unavoidable consequence of an action. It is the immutable spiritual energy of cause and effect. Think of it less like a modern courtroom and much more like spiritual physics. For every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. It's the ultimate as you sow, so shall ye reap. It's an inescapable reality of energy, absolutely not a subjective regulation or a rule.
The text draws really stark contrast here. On one side, you have true law, which is inescapable spiritual physics. On the other side, you have the rules of man. And this goes back to that etymological history the author brings up. The argument is that the concept of law became totally subjective the moment humans, men and women alike, decided they could just decree something, scribble it down on a piece of paper, or type it into a digital database and enforce it. According to the text, a man-made law is actually no law at all.
Section 2. The illusion of rules.
So, the text points to some highly specific, everyday examples to make this point. Things like seatbelt mandates in cars, regulations requiring fishermen to radio in their catch times, or mundane tax and license levies. According to the author, these are absolutely not laws. They are mundane, illegitimate control mechanisms. In fact, the text goes so far as to view them as demonic control, masquerading as being for your own good, when they are really just designed to extract wealth and restrict your freedom.
So the crucial point here is a major semantic distinction the author makes. Breaking the law is a complete misnomer. Because true law is physics, it's cause and effect. You literally cannot break it, any more than you can jump off a roof and break the law of gravity. You can only defy a human rule and subsequently suffer a punitive penalty imposed by other human beings.
Section 3. The state and force.
The text forces us to ask a pretty bold question. Does a shiny badge or a fancy uniform somehow override the universe? The author's resounding answer is no way. The argument is that absolutely no mortal is capable of overriding the true law, irrespective of how much they vote or decree or legislate. It doesn't matter if they claim they're just following orders, or if they deem it to be a duty, or wear fancy uniforms, carry shiny badges, or even get paid for it. The text views all of these as a myriad of deceptive practices, entirely designed to feign false legitimacy where no genuine legitimacy actually exists.
And that brings us to how the text categorizes the state, which it repeatedly and rather playfully refers to as Caesar's Club. The author argues the state is an entirely illegitimate entity that relies strictly on the force of arms, like guns, swords, and cages, to extort the public through fines and taxes. And what's really fascinating is how the text views constitutions. It argues they are, again, just mere paper documents used as a deceptive practice to feign that false legitimacy.
So invoking the phrase, "it is the law," is, according to the text, just a coercive threat backed by violence. The author argues that when a judge or a police officer says it is the law, they are participating in a grand historical deception, disguising what is actually just an arbitrary decree as some kind of absolute or divine mandate.
Section 4. Light versus dark power. And this brilliantly illustrates the deep spiritual dualism in the text. The author maps out two stark forces. On one side, you have the light sovereign power associated with God the Mother, peace, mercy, forgiveness, and creative, benign energy. On the other side is the dark sovereign power associated with God the Father, punishment, retribution, and destructive, vengeful energy.
Now, what is highly unique about this source text is that it takes all state enforcement, policing, and punitive justice and places it firmly under the umbrella of that dark sovereign power, which creates what the author calls the trap of enforcement. It's like a giant karmic puzzle. Step 1, vain men write down subjective, forceful rules. Step 2, enforcers, like police and judges, use that destructive, dark power to forcefully punish the people who don't comply. But here's step 3, because the true law of cause and effect is totally inescapable, these enforcers inadvertently curse their own souls. By meting out suffering, they guarantee that they will receive suffering in return.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how the text reinterprets a phrase we've probably all heard a million times, judge not lest ye be judged. The author doesn't view this as just some nice moral advice. They interpret it as literal karmic physics. If you sit on a bench and pass a punitive sentence on someone, you are magnetically drawing that exact same punishment back onto your own soul down the line. It's a heavy concept.
Section 5. The Ultimate Code of Conduct.
So, what is the author's solution to navigating all this? It's radical, absolute pacifism. They call it walking in peace. The directives are crystal clear. Ignore the false authority of all man-made institutions. Remember, they're just ink on paper, feigning legitimacy. Instead, obey only the universal command to love one another, be merciful, compassionate, and forgiving. And critically, and this is a tough one, never retaliate with force, even when the state uses force against you, because fighting back just pulls you right back into the dark power's karmic trap.
Which leaves us with this final, profound thought to consider. If human legislation is truly just ink on paper feigning false legitimacy and enforced only by shiny badges and guns, what truly governs our actions? Are we guided by the fear of man-made retribution, or are we guided by an inescapable, universal law of cause and effect? It's a pretty fascinating lens through which to view society, authority, and our own personal responsibility. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you on the next one.